The concert hall was a universe of breathless silence. Every one of the 2,000 velvet seats was filled, every eye fixed on the impossible man at the grand piano. His name was Kang Seo-jun, and for 3 agonizing years, his hands had been ghosts, refusing to touch the keys that had once been his entire world. He was a king in exile from his own heart, a musical prodigy who had sentenced himself to silence. But tonight, he played. He played for her. His eyes, dark and intense enough to hold galaxies, found hers across the vast, shadowed space. Naomi Clarke felt the gaze like a physical touch, a high-voltage current that arced directly from his soul to hers, setting every nerve ending alight. The music that poured from the piano was not just a melody. It was a confession, a raw, unfiltered torrent of every unspoken thought, every stolen glance, every moment of agonizing restraint that had defined their existence for the past 2 months. It was the sound of a man breaking open, of a heart uncaging itself from years of suffocating guilt and grief. It was devastatingly beautiful, and so full of a fierce, desperate love it hurt to breathe. Tears she didn't know she was holding began to trace hot paths down her cheeks, because she knew. This music, this beautiful, agonizing sound, it was her name, spoken in notes. It was the story of them. But every story has a beginning, a single note that starts the song. Theirs began 2 months earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the sky over Seoul weeping. Naomi Clarke arrived in South Korea on a wave of grief, the loss of her mother, a hollow, resonant ache in her chest that the 12-hour flight from Atlanta had only amplified. The city greeted her not with a gentle welcome, but with a relentless, driving rain that blurred the vibrant neon signs of Gangnam into watercolor streaks and turned the streets into dark, shimmering mirrors. Lost, jet-lagged, and dragging a suitcase with a defiantly squeaky wheel that announced her misery to the entire neighborhood, she was the very picture of a drowned rat. Her phone, her only lifeline in this sprawling, unfamiliar metropolis, was a dead black rectangle in her hand. The address of her new apartment, a string of Korean characters she couldn't yet read, was a useless piece of data trapped in its dead memory. The rain plastered her thick, beautiful curls to her forehead and seeped into her sneakers with a dismal squelch. This was a miserable welcome, a stark, gray contrast to the vibrant, healing journey she had promised her mother she would take. Her mother, a woman whose laughter was a melody, who had always said that music could mend anything broken. Her voice was a constant, gentle hum in the back of Naomi's mind, a painful reminder of the silence she now lived with. Right now, all Naomi felt was broken. She ducked under the narrow awning of a cosmetics shop, shivering, the bright, perfect faces of K-pop idols smiling down at her with an infuriating cheerfulness. And then she saw it across the street, a traditional Korean house, a hanok with a gently curved tile roof and warm, golden light spilling from its wooden lattice doors. A small, hand-carved sign read Daewon, a tea house. It was a port in the storm, an island of serenity in a sea of chaos. With a surge of desperation, she plunged back into the downpour, her squeaky wheel a frantic counterpoint to the rhythm of the rain. The moment she slid the heavy wooden door open, the world changed. The chaotic symphony of the city, the blaring traffic, the hiss of the rain, the squeak of her own damned wheel, was replaced by a profound, enveloping silence. The air smelled of aged wood, damp earth, and the subtle, clean aroma of brewing tea. An elderly woman in a simple, elegant hanbok greeted her with a serene smile and a soft nod, taking her dripping coat and soaked bag without a word, her movements calm and practiced, as if lost, grieving Americans stumbled into her sanctuary every day. Naomi was led to a small, low table in a secluded corner, the polished dark wood of the floor cool beneath her tired feet. She felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time that day, a quiet gratitude for this unexpected kindness. And that's when she saw him. He was alone, seated at a table across the room, a cup of pale green tea held in one large, elegant hand. He was the first thing she'd seen in Seoul that was perfectly, breathtakingly clear. He was a man built on a scale that seemed to defy the delicate proportions of the tea house. Unusually tall, with shoulders that spoke of a deep, quiet strength beneath the impeccable cut of his dark, expensive-looking suit. His hair was black as polished ink, falling with a casual sort of precision across a strong forehead. But it was his face that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a masterpiece of sharp angles and intense, masculine beauty, a strong jaw, a straight, aristocratic nose, lips that were firm and serious. He was, without question, the most handsome man she had ever seen. Not in a polished, airbrushed way of the idols on the posters outside. This was something more fundamental, more dangerous. A rugged, charismatic energy seemed to radiate from him, even in stillness. A primal, raw power leashed beneath a veneer of civilized grace. He seemed to be staring out at the rain-streaked garden, a universe of thought in his stillness. But then, as if he'd felt the weight of her gaze like a physical touch, he turned his head. His eyes met hers. They were dark, so dark they seemed to pull the light from the room, and they held an expression of such profound, weary sadness that it resonated with the grief in her own soul. The connection was instantaneous, a silent, startling recognition. A shared understanding of sorrow that passed between two strangers in a quiet room. The moment stretched, taut, and electric. He didn't smile. She didn't look away. It felt like they were the only two people in the world, two lonely planets that had suddenly found themselves in the same orbit. He broke the contact first, a slow, deliberate blink, a slight turn of his head back to the window. The spell was broken. Naomi felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, embarrassed by her own intensity. She focused on the delicate porcelain cup of tea the owner placed before her, the steam warming her cold face. She stayed for an hour, letting the quiet of the place seep into her bones, the warmth of the tea a small comfort against the chill of her grief. When she finally rose to leave, her phone now partially charged thanks to the kind owner, she saw that the man was gone. She felt a pang of disappointment so sharp it surprised her. She stepped outside, steeling herself for the rain, but found it had softened to a gentle drizzle. Leaning against the wall beside the door was a large, black umbrella. Tucked into the handle was a small, simple card from the tea house. On the back, in strong, clean handwriting, was a single word: welcome. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, she knew it was from him. She stood there for a long moment, the umbrella in her hand, a silent gift from a sad-eyed stranger who had seen her, truly seen her, without a single word being spoken. She walked back to her apartment under his umbrella, the rain a soft, silver curtain around her. The umbrella was large enough to shelter two people, and the empty space beside her felt like a question. That night, in her small, bare apartment, she sat on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and thought about him. She thought about the way his eyes had held hers, the way the sadness in them had felt like a mirror. She thought about her mother, who had always believed that the universe put people in your path for a reason. "Pay attention to the strangers, baby," she used to say. "God sends his messages through the people you least expect." Naomi pressed her face into the pillow and let herself cry, not just for her mother, but for the strange, aching beauty of a city that was already beginning to feel like something more than a destination. It was beginning to feel like an answer. The next morning, under a sky washed clean and blue, Naomi found her way to the gleaming, modern skyscraper that housed the Kang Cultural Center. Her fellowship, a prestigious grant to study the therapeutic effects of traditional Korean music, was sponsored by the Kang Group, one of the country's most powerful entertainment dynasties. She felt a flutter of nervous excitement. This was it. The new beginning. The work that would honor her mother's memory. She was shown into a sleek, minimalist conference room on the 28th floor. A smiling, impeccably dressed woman named Ms. Choi welcomed her warmly. "Dr. Clarke, welcome to the Kang Foundation. We are so honored to have you. Your institutional liaison will be with you shortly. He will oversee your fellowship and ensure you have everything you need." Ah, here he is now. The door opened. Naomi turned, a bright, professional smile on her face, ready to meet her new colleague. The smile froze. The man who walked in was the stranger from the tea house. The same impossible height, the same devastating face, the same suit that probably cost more than her entire master's degree. But the man who stood before her now was a world away from the silent, sad-eyed gentleman who had given her his umbrella. This man's eyes were cold, his expression unreadable, his posture radiating an intimidating, commanding presence. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavy, charged.
Dr. Clarke, I am Kang Seo-jun, director of the foundation.
His voice, it was deep, a low, resonant timbre that seemed to vibrate right through the floor. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. There was no flicker of recognition in his eyes, no hint that they had shared a moment of profound connection less than 24 hours ago. He was a fortress, and the gates were closed. "Mr. Kang, it's a pleasure to meet you." He gave a short, formal bow, his gaze sweeping over her with a cool, professional assessment that made her feel like a line item on a budget report. He was all business, his every movement precise and controlled. He walked her through the facility, his voice a clipped, efficient monotone as he pointed out the state-of-the-art library, the performance halls, the research archives. The warmth and magic of their silent encounter in the tea house felt like a dream, a figment of her jet-lagged imagination.
And this will be your primary workspace, a practice and consultation room. It is soundproofed, of course. You will find all the requested traditional instruments have been procured.
He opened a door to a beautiful, light-filled room with one wall of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city. It was perfect, more than perfect. She stepped inside, running a hand over the smooth wood of a Seo-jun, a traditional zither. He remained at the door, his presence filling the frame. "It's wonderful, thank you."
My office is next door. Should you require anything, you may contact my assistant. A full schedule of your preliminary meetings will be on your desk. I trust you will be adequate.
Adequate, the word was a small, sharp dart, a deliberate splash of cold water. He turned to leave, his dismissal absolute. Naomi stood there, a strange mix of indignation and confusion swirling inside her. This man, this Kang Seo-jun, was an enigma, a puzzle of contradictions. The kind stranger, the cold director, who was he? That night, exhausted but too wired to sleep, Naomi sat in her new practice room, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. The silence of the 28th floor was absolute. She was about to start unpacking her research notes when she heard it. A sound so faint she thought she'd imagined it. It came from the other side of the wall she shared with his office. It was the sound of a single piano key being pressed. A low, melancholic C-sharp. The note hung in the air for a long, heartbreaking moment, a perfect, solitary tier of sound. And then silence. A silence that felt heavier, sadder, than any she had ever known. She held her breath, waiting for more, but nothing came. She was sitting in the dark, listening to the silence of the man next door. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. The first 2 weeks were a whirlwind of settling in. Naomi found a small but charming apartment in a neighborhood filled with the scent of kimchi stew and the cheerful chatter of university students. She learned to navigate the sprawling, efficient subway system and discovered the simple joy of a warm hatagwaja, a walnut cake, on a crisp autumn morning. Seoul was a city of dazzling contradictions. Ancient palaces nestled in the shadows of gleaming skyscrapers, serene temples just steps away from bustling, neon-lit markets. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and for the first time since her mother's passing, Naomi felt moments of genuine, unburdened peace. Her grief was still a passenger, but it no longer had its hands on the steering wheel. Her work was her true anchor. The Kang Foundation had given her access to a small group of elderly patients in a long-term care facility, many of them suffering from dementia and chronic pain. She began her sessions, not with dry clinical questions, but with music. She played the Seo-jun, its 12 silk strings producing a sound that was both bright and melancholic. She sang old Korean folk songs, her voice, a rich and soulful alto, filling the sterile rooms with a warmth they hadn't known. She saw the flicker of memory in a grandmother's eyes, the tapping of a grandfather's fingers to a forgotten rhythm. This was her magic. This was her mother's legacy. This was healing. Kang Seo-jun was a ghost. He was a name on emails, a signature on documents, a silent presence she felt more than saw. He never attended the patient sessions, but she knew he was watching. She would see the evidence, detailed reports on her patients' progress appearing on her desk, translated articles on music therapy from obscure Korean academic journals, a state-of-the-art recording device she hadn't requested, for your archival purposes. He observed from a distance, his approval clinical, his methods efficient. But she felt his eyes on her work, and it was a strange, unsettling pressure. She was a variable in his controlled world, and she could feel him trying to solve her, to fit her neatly into a box. His younger sister, Minjae, was his complete opposite. She burst into Naomi's life like a champagne cork, all bright smiles and mischievous energy. Minjae was a designer for the Kang Group's fashion line, and she adopted Naomi instantly, declaring her the most interesting thing to happen to the foundation in years. It was Minjae who insisted on dragging Naomi to a formal foundation dinner, an event Naomi would have been perfectly happy to skip. "You must come, father will be there, and all the old dragons from the board. It's terribly boring, but you'll be my shield, and besides, my brother will be there." Minjae said it with a sly, knowing look that made Naomi's stomach do a little flip. The night of the dinner, Minjae appeared at her apartment with a large, silk-wrapped box. "You can't wear your sad American clothes. You are in Seoul now, you must look the part." Inside was a hanbok, but it was unlike any traditional dress Naomi had ever seen. It was a modern interpretation, crafted from heavy, deep indigo silk that shimmered like a midnight sky. The jeogori, the short jacket, was tailored and elegant, and the chima, the skirt, was a voluminous cascade of fabric that felt both regal and romantic. When Naomi put it on, she felt transformed. The silk whispered against her skin, and the color made her dark complexion glow. For a moment, looking in the mirror, she wasn't a grieving daughter or a clinical researcher. She was just a woman, a beautiful woman. The dinner was held in a private room of a lavish hotel, all crystal chandeliers and hushed whispers. Naomi felt out of place, a poppy in a field of carefully cultivated orchids. Then Seo-jun walked in. He commanded the room without a word, his height and rugged charisma making the other suited men seem like pale imitations. He moved with a predatory grace, his presence a low hum of power. He was greeting a board member when he turned his head and saw her. It was only for a second, a single unguarded moment, but Naomi saw it. His smooth, professional mask didn't just crack, it fractured. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, his lips parted on a silent, indrawn breath. He stared, his gaze sweeping over her from the crown of her head to the hem of the silk skirt, and the look in his eyes was not that of a cold director assessing an employee. It was the look of a man seeing a woman who had just stolen the air from his lungs. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the moment was gone. The mask slammed back into place. His expression became unreadable, his eyes cool, but she had seen it, and he knew she had. The dinner was a minefield of polite, stilted conversation. Naomi was seated between Minjae and an elderly board member, a man named Mr. Kim, whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The table was a masterpiece of Korean fine dining, each dish a small work of art on delicate porcelain. Seo-jun was at the head of the table, a picture of cool, detached authority, never once looking in her direction. But Naomi was acutely, painfully aware of him. She was aware of the way his long fingers wrapped around the stem of his wine glass. She was aware of the low rumble of his voice as he spoke to the woman beside him. She was aware of the way the candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw. She was aware, and it infuriated her. She was a scientist, a woman of logic and reason. She did not get flustered by handsome men. She did not replay a single, silent glance in a tea house over and over in her mind like a lovesick teenager. And yet, here she was, her pulse quickening every time his deep voice cut through the polite chatter of the table. Mr. Kim turned to her, his voice oozing a condescending sort of charm.
"Dr. Clarke, your work is novel, but one wonders about the introduction of such strong Western influences like American soul music into the lives of our elders. Their minds are fragile. It could be confusing for them."
The comment was subtle, wrapped in a layer of false concern, but the implication was sharp and ugly. It was the same kind of casual, dismissive racism Naomi had dealt with her entire life. She drew a breath, ready to defend her work, her culture, herself, with the calm, academic precision she had perfected over years. But she never got the chance.
Confusing Mr. Kim.
Seo-jun's voice sliced through the clinking of cutlery. It wasn't loud, but it had the chilling finality of a blade hitting stone. Every conversation at the table stopped. He hadn't looked up from his plate, but his focus was entirely on the old man.
Dr. Clarke's research was vetted by the top neurologists at Seoul National University. Her methods are at the global forefront of music therapy. The only thing I find confusing is the notion that our elders are so fragile they can't appreciate a beautiful voice, regardless of its origin. Or are you suggesting the foundation should only invest in mediocrity, so long as it is purely Korean mediocrity?
The takedown was so quiet, so swift, so utterly devastating that Mr. Kim's face went from smug to ashen in a heartbeat. He stammered an apology, suddenly fascinated by his water glass. The table was shrouded in a thick, uncomfortable silence. Seo-jun took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, the picture of calm. He never looked at Naomi, not once. But as she sat there, stunned and silent, she felt a subtle vibration through the floor. She glanced down. Under the pristine white tablecloth, Seo-jun's hand, resting on his knee, was clenched into a tight, white-knuckled fist. Later, as the dinner was breaking up, Naomi slipped away, needing a moment to breathe. She walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. His defense of her had been shocking, a display of fierce, hidden protectiveness that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. As she passed the alcove leading to the restrooms, she saw him. He was standing in front of a large, floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, looking out at the glittering city. But she could see his reflection in the dark glass, and the image in the window stopped her heart. The mask was gone. The cold, controlled director had vanished. The man in the reflection was a stranger. His shoulders were slumped, his head was bowed, and his face was a mask of such raw, gut-wrenching pain that she felt an involuntary gasp escape her lips. It was the man from the tea house, the sad-eyed stranger. He was back. He must have heard her or perhaps just sensed her presence, because in the space of a heartbeat, the transformation was absolute. His shoulders straightened. His head came up. The mask of cool indifference slammed back down, so quickly it was like watching a shutter close. He turned from the window to face her, his expression utterly blank.
Do you need something, Dr. Clarke?
His voice was ice. The warmth of his defense, the vulnerability of his reflection, it was all gone, locked away behind a fortress of control. She felt like she had intruded on something sacred, something deeply private. She couldn't speak, just shook her head and retreated back down the hall, her heart pounding. But as she walked away, she heard it again. Faint but unmistakable. A single, perfect piano note, played on his phone or some other device, a sound that was both a question and a wound. The note hung in the air between them, a ghost of the man he swore to hide, and then it faded to nothing. Their professional relationship settled into a strange, taut rhythm. On the surface, Kang Seo-jun remained the distant, formidable director. He communicated through his assistant, his emails were clipped and formal, and he never again sought her out in person. And yet, his presence was a constant, invisible force in her life. It was in the small, inexplicable details. The rare, out-of-print book on music's effect on memory that appeared on her desk, with no note. The specific blend of jasmine green tea she'd idly mentioned enjoying that was suddenly stocked in the communal kitchen on her floor. The way the heating in her soundproofed room, which had been temperamental, was now always a perfect, consistent temperature. These were not grand gestures. They were quiet, precise acts of attention, as meticulous and controlled as the man himself. It was as if he were studying her, learning her preferences, and making adjustments to her environment from a distance, through walls of silk and steel. Naomi found it both unnerving and strangely touching. He was a man who spoke in actions, not words. A man who would defend her in public and then pretend she didn't exist. A man who filled his office with a heavy, impenetrable silence, yet seemed to be listening to her every breath. The wall between their rooms became a character in their story, a silent witness. Sometimes, late at night, she would press her ear against the cool plaster, straining to hear something, anything. But there was only silence. The single, sad notes had vanished, and she missed them with an ache that made no sense. One Tuesday afternoon, the sky, which had been a placid blue, turned a bruised, angry purple. The rain came suddenly and violently, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Kang Tower. The lights in Naomi's practice room flickered once, twice, then died, plunging her into a disorienting twilight. The city lights below vanished, leaving only the ghostly glow of the emergency exit signs in the hallway. A collective groan went through the building. Naomi gathered her things, deciding to call it a day. She was heading for the emergency stairs when the elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, its interior lit by a pale, battery-powered light. She stepped inside, grateful to avoid the 28 flights of stairs. Just as the doors were about to slide shut, a hand shot out, stopping them. The doors slid back open to reveal Kang Seo-jun. He looked startled to see her, his composure ruffled for a fraction of a second. He gave her a stiff, formal nod and stepped inside, his broad shoulders barely clearing the frame. The doors slid shut, encasing them in the small metal box. The elevator gave a lurch, descended one floor, and then stopped with a sickening jolt that threw Naomi off balance. She stumbled forward, right into him. It was like walking into a wall of solid heat. His hands came up, grabbing her arms to steady her, his grip firm and sure. For a dizzying second, her face was pressed against the hard plane of his chest, the scent of his cologne, clean cedar, expensive wool, and something darker, more primal, like ozone after a lightning strike, filling her lungs. The fabric of his suit was crisp beneath her cheek. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her ear. He was so tall, so solid, he seemed to take up all the air in the small space. The emergency light flickered, casting his face in shifting shadows, his sharp jawline, the intense line of his mouth. He let go of her as if he'd been burned, and she scrambled back to her side of the elevator, her skin tingling where he'd touched her.
Are you all right?
His voice was low, rougher than she'd ever heard it. The polished CEO veneer had been stripped away by the sudden darkness and proximity. In the dim emergency light, she could see the rapid pulse at the base of his throat, the way his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. He was not as unaffected as he wanted her to believe. The realization sent a dangerous thrill through her. "Yes, fine, thank you." Her voice came out breathier than she intended. She smoothed her hands over her skirt, a nervous gesture, trying to ground herself. The space between them felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm, thick with potential energy waiting to be released. She could still feel the phantom imprint of his hands on her arms, the solid wall of his chest against her cheek. Her body remembered the contact with a vividness that was almost alarming. He pressed the emergency call button. A tinny, disembodied voice assured them that a maintenance team was on its way. It could be a while. The power was out citywide. They were trapped. The silence that fell was thick and heavy, charged with an energy that was almost suffocating. He stood perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow and tension. Naomi, feeling the need to fill the silence, spoke. "I hate elevators." He turned his head, his expression unreadable in the dim light.
It is merely a box suspended by a cable. The engineering is sound.
"I know it's not logical, it's the silence. The waiting, it feels final." He considered her words, his dark eyes searching her face.
I've always found silence to be honest. It doesn't lie.
Maybe, or maybe it just lets you tell yourself whatever story you want to hear. Music is honest. It can be sad, or angry, or joyful, but it never pretends to be something it's not. They were not just talking about elevators anymore. They were talking about the space between them, the unspoken things that hung in the air. They were talking about the wall that separated their rooms.
And what happens when the music stops? When a song gets stuck in your chest and can't come out?
His voice was quiet, but the question was a raw, open wound. She knew he wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was speaking of himself. Of the single, sad notes she'd heard through the wall. She met his gaze, her own honesty rising to meet his. My mother died 6 months ago. She was a singer. Her voice, it was like coming home. When she got sick, she couldn't sing anymore. The silence in our house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I think when the music gets stuck, you have to find someone else to help you sing it. She hadn't meant to say that. It was too personal, too real, but the darkness had loosened something in her. He went very still, his formidable frame seeming to fill the small space even more. The look in his eyes was one of stunned, aching recognition. He understood. He truly understood. Just as he was about to speak, the main lights flickered on with a hum. The elevator gave a lurch and began its smooth descent. The spell was shattered. They both stepped back, retreating to their corners, the invisible walls between them slamming back into place. When the doors slid open on the ground floor, they stepped out into the brightly lit lobby as if escaping a fire, not looking at each other, not saying a word. That night, Naomi sat in her room, the city once again a glittering carpet below. She couldn't stop thinking about the man in the elevator, the raw vulnerability in his voice, the way he looked at her when she spoke of her mother. She was pressing her forehead against the cool wall, her shared wall, when she heard it. It started hesitantly. A single note. Then another. Then a cascade of notes, tumbling over each other in a broken, halting melody. It was achingly beautiful, a sound full of a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. It was the sound of a heart trying to remember how to speak. The melody grew stronger, more confident, then faltered, crashing into a dissonant chord. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of his voice, a raw, wrecked whisper that carried through the wall as if he were standing right beside her.
I can't.
The words were a surrender, a confession of defeat that tore at something deep inside her. Without thinking, Naomi pressed her palm flat against the wall, as if she could send her own strength, her own belief, through the plaster and steel. She whispered to the wall, her voice barely audible, a prayer sent into the silence. You can. She didn't know if he heard her. She didn't know if he was even listening. But the silence that answered her felt different this time. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. It felt like something, somewhere in the darkness, had just cracked open. Something had indeed cracked open. After the night of the broken melody, the dynamic between them shifted again. Kang Seo-jun was no longer fighting to keep Naomi out. He was losing a battle against pulling her in. He was still the formidable director, but the fortress of his control was showing hairline fractures. He started finding excuses, however flimsy, to be near her work. He would appear at the long-term care facility under the guise of an inspection, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes fixed on her as she sang a lullaby to a woman old enough to be his grandmother. He would stand there for a long moment, his expression unreadable, yet his stillness was so intense it felt louder than a shout. And in those moments, as Naomi's voice wrapped around the frail, lonely souls in the room, she felt his gaze not as a pressure, but as a kind of yearning. A man starved of warmth, standing at the edge of a fire. One crisp Saturday, Min-jae insisted on dragging Naomi to Gwangjang Market, a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of street food stalls and bustling crowds. You can't live in Seoul and only eat sad salads in your apartment, she declared. Naomi, laughing, allowed herself to be pulled into the vibrant heart of the city. The air was thick with the steam of boiling dumplings and the sizzle of savory pancakes. It was a joyous assault on the senses. As Min-jae was haggling with a vendor over a bolt of silk, Naomi felt a familiar shift in the atmosphere, the same change in pressure she felt whenever he entered a room. She turned, and there he was. He was leaning against a stall selling fiery red tteokbokki, the spicy rice cakes simmering in a bubbling cauldron. But this was not Director Kang. The tailored suits and silk ties were gone. In their place were dark, fitted jeans that hugged powerful legs, a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across a broad chest, and a worn black leather jacket that looked like a second skin. The controlled CEO had vanished, and in his place was something rawer, more elemental, more dangerous. His hair was slightly mussed by the wind, and without the armor of his corporate identity, the raw, primal energy he possessed was on full display. He was devastating. He happened to be there, a coincidence so transparent it was almost comical. Min-jae spotted him and waved him over, a triumphant grin on her face. "Opa, fancy seeing you here. I was just showing Naomi the real Seoul."
I had a meeting nearby.
His voice was a low rumble, and his eyes were on Naomi. They held a heat that had nothing to do with the bubbling pots of food around them. He bought them tteokbokki, the fiery red sauce a stark contrast to the black container. He watched Naomi take her first bite, his eyes tracking the movement of her lips. She coughed, the spice more potent than she expected. "Wow, that's got a kick." He laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle of the boardroom. It was a deep, rich sound that made her stomach flutter. He picked up a piece with his chopsticks and held it out to her.
You just have to commit to the heat.
She leaned forward, taking the rice cake from his chopsticks, her lips accidentally brushing the tips of his fingers. The touch was electric, a small explosion of heat that had nothing to do with the chili sauce. Neither of them breathed. The chaotic noise of the market faded into a dull roar. There was only the feeling of his skin against hers, a fleeting, forbidden contact that sent a shockwave straight to her core. He pulled his hand back slowly, his eyes dark and intense. After Min-jae made her excuses and disappeared into the crowd with a wink, they were left alone. They walked in a comfortable silence, the bustling market giving way to the serene path along the Han River. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, the river a ribbon of molten gold. The city's skyscrapers glittered around them like a man-made constellation. He was no longer the director, and she was no longer the fellow. They were just a man and a woman, walking by a river.
My brother Min-seok, he would have liked you.
He said it quietly, his gaze on the distant mountains. It was the first time he had ever mentioned a name. Naomi remained silent, giving him the space to speak. The river lapped gently against the stone embankment, a soft, rhythmic sound that seemed to give him permission to continue. He walked with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing himself against a wind only he could feel. "Tell me about him." It was a simple request, but it was an invitation into the most guarded room in his heart. He was quiet for a long time, so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Softer, younger, as if the memory had peeled back the layers of the powerful director and revealed the boy underneath.
He was light, that's the only word for it. He walked into a room and the whole energy changed. He made everyone laugh. He made everything feel less heavy. He was the musician, the true prodigy. I was just the older brother who happened to be good at it. He loved American soul music. Aretha Otis, your people. He said it was the most honest music in the world. The accident, I was driving. It was raining. We were arguing about something stupid. About me joining the family business instead of pursuing music with him. The car spun out. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. The music, it died with him. I haven't played since his funeral. 3 years. It feels like 100.
His voice didn't break, but the pain was a living thing in his words, a weight he had carried every single day. Naomi's heart ached for him. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She just listened, her presence a quiet testament to his confession. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently touched his arm, her fingers resting on the worn leather of his jacket. "Thank you for telling me." They walked in silence for a while, the weight of his confession settling between them like a shared burden. It was Naomi who spoke next, her voice soft but steady. "My mother used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. When she died, I thought the music would die with her, too. She had this voice, Seo-jun. This incredible, soaring voice that could make you cry and laugh in the same breath. And when she got sick, when the cancer took her voice first, before it took everything else, the silence was unbearable. I came to Seoul because I thought if I could prove that music heals, if I could make her life's work mean something, then maybe the silence wouldn't be so loud." He had stopped walking. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not pity. It was not sympathy. It was recognition. The look of a man who had just heard his own story told back to him in a different voice. They stood there, two people bound by the same beautiful, terrible thread of loss, the Han River flowing silently beside them, carrying the last light of the day towards the sea.
Your mother sounds like she was extraordinary.
She would have loved Seoul. She would have loved this river.
I think she would have loved that her daughter is here, doing exactly what she was meant to do.
The words were so simple, so quietly spoken, but they hit Naomi with the force of a revelation. No one, not her friends, not her colleagues, not her therapist, had ever said anything that made her feel so completely seen. He stopped walking, turning to face her. The look in his eyes was one of profound, soul-deep gratitude. It was the look of a man who had been speaking a language no one understood, who had finally found someone who was fluent. He walked her back to the entrance of her apartment building, the street quiet and dark. He stood before her, so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. The air between them was thick, combustible. His hand came up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw without actually touching her, hovering a millimeter from her skin. She could feel the heat of his palm, could feel her own skin yearning for the contact. His gaze dropped to her lips.
Good night, Naomi.
He said her name for the first time without a title. It was a caress, a confession. He dropped his hand, his jaw tight as if fighting a war with himself. He turned and walked away into the darkness, his broad shoulders rigid. Naomi leaned against the cool glass of the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. Far away, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering city, Chairman Kang looked at a series of photographs on his desk. They were taken from a distance, grainy but clear. They showed his son, his heir, laughing at a market stall. They showed him feeding a piece of food to a foreign woman, a black woman. They showed him looking at her with an expression the chairman had never seen on his son's face before. An expression of unguarded, unmistakable devotion. He picked up his phone, his face a mask of cold fury. Seo-jun answered on the second ring.
My office now.
When Seo-jun arrived, the chairman didn't waste time with pleasantries. He gestured to the photos on the desk.
I have seen how you look at the American, how you follow her like a lost dog. This family has not spent generations building an empire to have it threatened by a foolish infatuation. End it. Whatever it is, end it now, or I will.
Will Seo-jun bend to his father's will? Don't miss a single moment of this enchanted story. Subscribe to Enchanted Chapters and click the notification bell. Your escape into unforgettable love continues right after this. The chairman's threat hung in the air like the chill of a coming winter. And just like that, the fragile warmth that had begun to bloom between Naomi and Seo-jun was gone, replaced by an Arctic cold. Seo-jun pulled away, not gradually, but with a brutal, surgical precision. He became a ghost again, but a colder, more distant one than before. The tentative emails stopped. The quiet acts of attention ceased. He began canceling their scheduled fellowship reviews, sending his perpetually flustered assistant, Mr. An, in his place. When Naomi passed him in the hallway, he would offer a stiff, formal nod, his eyes looking straight through her as if she were made of glass. The change was so abrupt, so complete, it gave her emotional whiplash. First, she was confused. Had she imagined the market, the walk by the river, the way he'd said her name? Then, confusion curdled into a deep, painful hurt. He had opened a door inside himself, had shown her a glimpse of the wounded man behind the mask, only to slam it shut in her face. The hurt simmered, and then, finally, it ignited into a slow-burning anger. An anger born not of pride, but of a sense of profound injustice. He had no right to pull her into his storm, only to leave her stranded. After a week of icy avoidance, she'd had enough. She marched to his office at the end of the day, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. His assistant tried to stop her, stammering about a busy schedule, but Naomi swept past him, her resolve a tangible force. She didn't knock. She pushed the heavy glass door open and walked in. He was standing at the window, his back to her, a dark silhouette against the bleeding sunset. He didn't turn around, but she knew he was aware of her. His entire body had gone rigid.
Mr. An is supposed to announce my visitors.
His voice was flat, dead, the voice of a stranger. I'm not a visitor, Seo-jun, and you and I are going to talk. He turned then, slowly. His face was a mask of cool indifference, but his eyes were a different story. They were dark, turbulent pools of emotion, a stark contradiction to his calm demeanor. He looked tired, the skin under his eyes darker than she'd ever seen it.
We have nothing to talk about, Dr. Clarke. Our relationship is purely professional. If you have a concern regarding your fellowship, you can address it with Mr. An.
Don't you dare hide behind titles and assistants. Not after everything. What changed? Just tell me what changed.
Nothing changed, because there was nothing to change. You are a temporary fellow at this foundation. I am the director. Any perceived familiarity was a professional misstep on my part. It has been corrected.
Every word was a carefully chosen icicle, designed to pierce and to freeze. He was trying to erase them. To erase the tea house, the elevator, the market, the confession by the river. He was trying to pretend the music she'd heard through the wall was just the wind. The injustice of it stole her breath. The hurt was so sharp it felt like a betrayal, and the anger finally boiled over. You're a coward. The word hung in the air between them, small and sharp and deadly. It hit him like a physical blow. She saw it in the sudden flinch of his shoulders, the tightening of his jaw.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Don't I? You showed me who you really are, Seo-jun. By the river, in the elevator, in the tea house. You showed me the man underneath all this armor. And now you're pretending he doesn't exist. That's not strength. That's fear.
You think you understand my world. You've been here 2 months. You don't know what it costs to.
To what? To feel something? To let someone in? I know exactly what that costs. I buried my mother 6 months ago. I know what it's like to be so afraid of losing someone that you'd rather feel nothing at all. But I didn't come halfway around the world to feel nothing. And neither did you. Her words landed with the precision of arrows, each one finding its mark. His carefully constructed mask of indifference shattered, not into coldness, but into something far more dangerous, raw, desperate honesty. In 2 long strides, he crossed the space between them. He didn't touch her, but he crowded her back against a towering bookshelf, his hands slamming against the shelves on either side of her head, caging her in. His body was a furnace of heat and tension, the scent of him, that intoxicating mix of cedar and lightning, overwhelming her senses. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his turbulent dark eyes.
A coward.
His voice was a ragged, broken whisper, laced with a pain that was terrifying to behold. It was the voice of a man on the edge of a precipice.
You think I don't feel this? You think I don't hear your music in my sleep? You think I don't want to cross that hallway and knock on your door every single night? You are the only thing I feel, Naomi. The only thing. And that is exactly why you have to stay away from me. It is the only way I can protect you.
His confession, torn from the deepest part of him, hung in the air, raw and bleeding. He was protecting her from his father, from his world, from himself. Before she could process it, before she could say a word, he pushed himself off the bookshelf, the violence of the movement rattling the books. He stalked out of the office without another word, without looking back, leaving her trembling in his wake, the ghost of his heat still on her skin, his desperate words echoing in the sudden, crushing silence. She stood there for a long time, her body shaking, her mind reeling. He wasn't pushing her away, he was shielding her. The realization shifted everything. The anger drained away, replaced by a fierce, protective ache in her own heart. She went back to her office, her legs unsteady. She sat down at her desk, her gaze falling on an official-looking envelope she had overlooked earlier. It was from the Foundation's administrative department. She tore it open, her hands still trembling slightly. It was a formal notice. Due to a reevaluation of budgetary priorities, The funding for her fellowship was being terminated, effective in 30 days. The order, it stated, came directly from the chairman's office. A cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Her work, her mother's legacy, was being erased. And the most terrible question of all began to form in her mind. Did Seo-jun know? Was this his way of protecting her? By sending her away for good? The termination letter felt like a declaration of war, but Naomi Clarke was not a woman who surrendered. The initial shock gave way to a cold, determined fury. This wasn't just about her or about Seo-jun. This was about her patience. It was about the promise she'd made to her mother. Chairman Kang had underestimated her. He saw her as a temporary distraction, a foreign complication. He was about to learn that she was a force of nature in her own right. Instead of packing her bags, Naomi doubled down on her work. She spent every waking hour at the care facility, documenting her patients' progress with meticulous detail. She recorded their stories, the way their eyes lit up when they heard a familiar song, the way their hands, gnarled with age, would tap out a rhythm. She compiled her data, her audio recordings, and her clinical observations into a comprehensive presentation. She wasn't just fighting for her job. She was fighting for the very principle that music could heal. She requested an emergency meeting with the foundation's board. To her surprise, it was granted. She stood before a panel of stern, suited men, including the impassive Chairman Kang. She didn't plead. She presented. Her voice was calm, her arguments precise. She played them a recording of a man who hadn't spoken in a year, humming along to a folk song. She showed them brain scans, highlighting the increased neural activity in the memory centers of the brain during her sessions. Her presentation was extraordinary, a powerful fusion of art and science. The board members were visibly impressed, murmuring amongst themselves. But the chairman remained unmoved, his face a mask of stone. Meanwhile, Seo-jun, lost in the self-imposed exile of his office, discovered what his father had done. He hadn't known. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His father hadn't just threatened Naomi, he had actively, cruelly tried to erase her. The confrontation between father and son was not a shouting match. It was a quiet, devastating battle of wills, fought in the hushed, formal tones of Korean, which only made it more brutal. It took place in the chairman's penthouse office, the city a silent, glittering witness below.
You went after her work, her name. You did it behind my back. I did what was necessary to protect this family. Sentiment is a weakness we cannot afford. I removed a liability. She is not a liability. She is a brilliant researcher who is bringing honor to this foundation. Weakness, Father, is cruelty disguised as strategy. You have dishonored yourself, and you have dishonored me.
Seo-jun's voice was measured, almost unnervingly calm, but his eyes were volcanic. He left his father's office, the air crackling with the unspoken schism between them. The next morning, Naomi received another official letter. The decision to terminate her fellowship had been rescinded. The funding, it stated, had been personally guaranteed and underwritten, not by the foundation, but by Kang Seo-jun himself. He had used his own fortune to defy his father. Naomi went to his office to thank him. He was standing by the window, as always, but this time he turned when she entered. He looked exhausted, but the turbulence in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, resolute calm. He refused to accept her gratitude.
It was not for you. Your research has merit. It is a sound investment, a simple business decision.
He was lying. She could see it in the way his jaw was clenched, in the way his hands were shoved deep into his pockets as if to keep from reaching for her. He was still trying to protect her, using the cold language of business as a shield. She saw through the lie. She always did. She simply nodded. Well then, thank you for your sound investment, Director Kang. I'll be sure to provide an excellent return. She left him there, her heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like a physical pain. He was fighting for her in the only way he knew how, from a distance, with his power and his money. He was building a wall around her, not to keep her out, but to keep the world from hurting her. A A few days later, Naomi received a formal, hand-delivered invitation. She was requested to take tea with Grandmother Kang, the family matriarch. She went to the family's ancestral home, a magnificent, sprawling hanok that felt like stepping back in time. The old woman, small and elegant in a traditional silk hanbok, was shrewd and warm, her eyes missing nothing. She told Naomi stories about Seo-jun as a boy, how he was a serious, intense child who only ever smiled when he was at the piano. How he played like he was having a conversation with God. How the music had died the same day his brother did. My son, the chairman, he sees only in black and white, power and weakness, assets and liabilities. He does not understand the language of the heart. My grandson, Seo-jun, he understands it too well. That is why he locked it away. The old woman paused, lifting her teacup with both hands, her movements deliberate and graceful. She took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving Naomi's face, reading her with the quiet intensity of someone who had spent a lifetime observing the human heart. When Min-seok died, something in Seo-jun died with him, not his heart. His heart is too strong for that, but his trust in joy. He decided that loving something too much was dangerous, that the music, the passion, the feeling, it was what had caused the pain. So he locked it all away and built himself into a machine. A perfect, efficient, joyless machine. I have watched him for 3 years, Dr. Clarke. I have watched my grandson become a ghost in an expensive suit, and then you arrived. Halmoni, do not be modest. I am too old for modesty. I have seen the way he looks when he speaks of your work. I have seen the light come back into his eyes. It is small, like a candle in a dark room, but it is there. He needs someone who is not afraid of his silence. Someone who can hear the music underneath. Are you that someone, Dr. Clarke? The question was direct, a gentle but firm challenge. Naomi met the old woman's wise gaze. She thought of the single piano note through the wall. She thought of the umbrella in the rain. She thought of the man in the elevator, whose voice had cracked when he asked what happens when the music stops. I am. Grandmother Kang smiled, a slow, satisfied smile that transformed her lined face into something radiant. She reached across the table and placed her small, weathered hand over Naomi's. Good, then you have my blessing and my protection. The chairman is my son, but he is not always wise. You will not face him alone. It was a blessing, an acceptance, and a promise of an alliance that would prove more powerful than any corporate maneuver the chairman could devise. The annual Kang Foundation Charity Gala was the social event of the season. Naomi attended, not as Min-jae's guest, but as a respected, grant-winning researcher in her own right. She wore a simple, elegant gown of shimmering gold, a color that seemed to radiate its own light. She was talking to a fellow researcher when she felt it again, that familiar shift in the atmosphere, the sudden drop in temperature that signaled his arrival. Seo-jun entered the grand ballroom, and a hush fell over the crowd. He was the epitome of power and grace, a dark prince in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was shaking hands, smiling a cool, professional smile when his gaze swept the room and landed on her. He stopped, mid-sentence, mid-handshake, everything stopped. The entire room seemed to follow his gaze to the woman in the golden dress. For one long, unguarded moment, his heart was in his eyes, longing, possession, a desperate, all-consuming love. It was a public declaration, more powerful than any words. And everyone saw it, including his father who stood across the room, his face a mask of thunderous fury. After that moment of silent, public declaration, the atmosphere in the ballroom became thick with an almost unbearable tension. Seo-jun had put his mask back in place, but the cracks were visible to anyone who dared to look. His eyes followed her across the room like a predator tracking prey. When she laughed at something a colleague said, his jaw tightened. When another man asked her to dance, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He and Naomi began to orbit each other, two celestial bodies caught in an undeniable gravitational pull. They were always on opposite sides of the vast room, yet they were the only two people who existed in it. Every near touch as they passed in the crowd was a small detonation. Every exchanged glance across the sea of faces was a secret conversation written in the language of desire and restraint. Naomi's skin was alive, humming with a constant awareness of where he was, who he was talking to, whether he was looking at her. It was maddening. It was exhilarating. The orchestra began to play a slow, haunting melody. A waltz. Couples began to drift onto the marble dance floor. Naomi stood near a pillar, nursing a glass of champagne she didn't want, watching the dancers swirl under the crystal chandeliers. She felt a presence beside her, a familiar heat that warmed the air. She didn't have to look. She knew it was him.
Dance with me.
It was not a question. It was a quiet command, a surrender to the force that had been pulling them together all night. She turned and looked up at him. His eyes were dark, intense, stripped of all pretense. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She placed her hand in his fingers closing around hers, warm and strong. He led her to the dance floor. His other hand settled on the small of her back, a firm, possessive pressure that sent a jolt of pure heat through the thin silk of her dress. It was a brand, a claim. They began to move together, and the rest of the room fell away. The orchestra's melody was a slow, aching thing, a waltz that seemed to have been written for this exact moment, for these two exact people. They fit together perfectly, her body following his lead as if they had been dancing together their entire lives. His hand on her back was a warm, possessive anchor, guiding her through the turns with an effortless authority. She could feel the controlled power in his frame, the way his muscles shifted beneath the fine fabric of his tuxedo. He was holding himself back, she realized, restraining himself. The tension in his body was a coiled spring, and the effort of not pulling her closer was visible in the tight set of his jaw. He held her closer than propriety allowed, their bodies brushing against each other with every step. The scent of him, cedar and that dark, electric something, filled her senses, making her dizzy. He spun her out, then pulled her back in, his grip tightening almost painfully for a second, as if he were afraid she might drift away. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against her ear, his warm breath a caress against her skin.
I have tried to stay away from you. I have failed.
His voice was a low, ragged confession, a sound meant only for her. She closed her eyes, leaning into his strength, her free hand coming to rest on the crisp lapel of his tuxedo. She could feel the powerful, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I know. The song ended, but they didn't move. They stood in the center of the dance floor, wrapped in their own world, the silence between them more intimate than any kiss. Finally, he released her, his hand lingering on her back for a moment too long. Without a word, he took her hand and led her from the ballroom, through a set of glass doors and onto a deserted stone terrace. The cool night air was a shock after the heat of the ballroom. They were on a high floor, and the city of Seoul was spread below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He didn't let go of her hand. He led her to the far end of the terrace, to a spot shrouded in shadow, away from the prying eyes of the party inside. He turned to face her, his back to the city, his face illuminated only by the faint glow from the ballroom. He raised his free hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, his touch as soft as a whisper. This time, there was no hesitation. This time, he was not pretending.
Naomi.
Her name was a prayer on his lips, and then he kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative first kiss. It was a deluge. It was a dam breaking. It was 3 months of denied hunger, of silent longing, of desperate, soul-deep connection unleashed in a single, consuming moment. His mouth was firm and hot and demanding, and she met his passion with her own, her hands coming up to tangle in his thick, dark hair. He groaned, a low, guttural sound of pure need, and pulled her flesh against him, his arm wrapping around her waist like a steel band, lifting her onto her toes. He backed her against the cold stone railing, his body a shield, his kiss a storm. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving and had just been offered a feast. It was the kiss of a woman who had found the other half of her soul. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other, the city lights a blur of color below. This changes everything. She whispered the words, her voice trembling.
No.
He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own dark and blazing with a fierce, unwavering certainty.
Everything changed the moment you walked into that tea house.
He kissed her again, slower this time, a kiss of reverence, of promise. A kiss that sealed their fate. They were so lost in their own world, on their secluded terrace high above the city, that they never saw the faint glint of a long-focus lens from a building across the street. They never heard the soft, predatory click of a camera shutter, capturing their stolen moment for the entire world to see. The photographer, a paparazzi hired by a rival company, smiled to himself. This was gold. This was career-making. This was the kind of scandal that would shake the foundations of the Kang Empire. Their private storm was about to become a very public hurricane. But in that moment, suspended in time on the terrace overlooking Seoul, Naomi and Seo-jun knew nothing of the lens pointed at them. They knew only each other. They knew only the taste of each other's lips, the feel of each other's skin, the sound of each other's breathing. They knew only that they had found something precious and rare, and they would not let it go. The kiss on the terrace was a private sunrise. The photograph that appeared the next morning was a public hurricane. It was on the front page of every online gossip site, a grainy but undeniable image of the stoic Kang heir, his iron control shattered, locked in a passionate embrace with a mysterious black woman. The image was raw and real, unfiltered by the careful curation that usually surrounded the Kang family. In it, Seo-jun was not the impeccable CEO. He was a man consumed by desire, his hand buried in her hair, his mouth on hers, his entire body language screaming possession and need. And Naomi, far from looking like a gold digger or a temptress, looked like she was drowning and he was her only lifeline. The headlines were a mix of sensationalism and thinly veiled racism. Kang heir's foreign scandal. The secret love of Seoul's most eligible bachelor. The comment sections were a cesspool. Anonymous trolls questioned her motives, made crude remarks about her race, and painted her as a gold-digging foreigner sinking her claws into a Korean dynasty. The storm had broken, and Naomi was at its epicenter. The chairman's fury was a palpable force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Kang Tower. He summoned Seo-jun to his office, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was low, each word a shard of ice. The photograph was spread across his mahogany desk like an accusation.
You have made this family a spectacle. You have made yourself a fool. This ends now. You will issue a statement denying any romantic involvement. You will state that Dr. Clarke was a temporary employee whose contract has ended. She will be on a plane back to America by the end of the week. You will choose Seo-jun. You will choose this family, this company, the legacy your grandfather built with his bare hands. Or you will choose that woman, and if you choose her, you will have nothing. You will no longer be my son.
The ultimatum was absolute, a choice between his entire world and the woman who had become its center. The pressure on Seo-jun was immense, a crushing weight that was visible in the tense set of his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes. He was fighting a war on all fronts, against his father, against the media, against a lifetime of duty and expectation. And Naomi saw what it was costing him. She saw the pain in his eyes every time a new, vicious article was published. She saw the way he stood as a shield between her and the storm, taking all the hits himself. And her heart broke, not for herself but for him, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. She loved him too much to be the reason for his ruin. She went to him that evening, finding him in his office, the city lights twinkling obliviously outside his window. She didn't waste time with small talk. Her voice was steady, though it cost her everything she had. "I'm leaving, Seo-jun. I'll go back to the States. We can tell your father you ended it. We can tell the world it was all a misunderstanding. The story will die, and everything will go back to normal for you. It's the only way." She was offering him an escape. She was offering to sacrifice her own heart to save his kingdom. It was the most selfless, most painful thing she had ever done. She had spent the entire day wrestling with the decision, her eyes red from crying, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But love, real love, meant sometimes choosing the other person's happiness over your own. It meant being brave enough to walk away. She expected him to argue, to protest. She did not expect the volcanic fury that erupted from him. He didn't raise his voice, but his reaction was one of the most violent things she had ever witnessed. He swept his arm across his desk, sending papers, a laptop, a heavy glass paperweight crashing to the floor in a sickening cascade of sound. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a wild, desperate fire.
No, absolutely not. You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't get to be the noble martyr. You don't get to leave.
He strode towards her, his energy so raw and powerful it was almost frightening. He took her by the shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. He was pleading with her, his voice a low, ragged growl.
Do you think I care about the company, about the money? It's all just metal and glass and numbers. You are real. This is real. I am not losing you.
Before she could respond, his assistant burst in, his face pale with panic. Director Kang, the pianist for the gala, she's stuck in traffic in Incheon. There's been a major accident. She's not going to make it. The concert starts in 30 minutes. The Kang Foundation's annual charity concert was the crown jewel of its social calendar. The grand hall was filled with the city's elite, politicians, and the media, all of them buzzing about the scandal. The scheduled star pianist was a world-renowned virtuoso. Her absence would be a disaster, another humiliation for the Kang family. Seo-jun looked at his frantic assistant, then at Naomi. A strange, terrifying calm settled over his features. He released her shoulders and walked out of the office, his strides long and purposeful. Naomi followed him, her heart pounding with a sense of dread. She found a seat in the back of the darkened concert hall just as the chairman was walking on stage to make a panicked announcement. The magnificent grand piano sat center stage, a black, silent beast under the glare of the spotlights. Seo-jun was standing in the wings, watching his father. He looked at the piano. He looked out into the audience, his eyes scanning the rows until they found her. He found her gaze and held it. And in that moment, she knew, a wave of nausea and terror washed over her. "No," she mouthed silently, shaking her head. "Don't." It had been 3 years, 3 years of silence, 3 years of guilt, 3 years of a locked door. He ignored her silent plea. He ignored his father's frantic gestures. He walked onto the stage. A shocked silence fell over the hall. He walked to the piano. He sat down. His hands, those large, beautiful hands that had refused to play, hovered over the ivory keys. He looked up one last time, his eyes finding hers across the vast, silent space, and he played. The first note was soft, hesitant, a single, questioning C-sharp. The same note she had heard through the wall. The note hung in the vast, silent hall like a held breath. Then another note joined it, tentative, searching like a hand reaching out in the dark. The audience was frozen, 2,000 people holding their collective breath, watching a man wage war with his own demons in real time. His fingers trembled above the keys, and for one terrible, suspended moment, Naomi thought he would stop. That the silence would swallow him whole again. But then his eyes found hers across the darkness, and something in his face changed. A resolve settled over his features, hard and bright as forged steel. His fingers came down. The melody began to form. It was the melody she had heard him struggle with, the broken, halting tune from the night of the power outage. But now it was no longer broken. It was whole. It was transformed. What had been a fragment, a ghost of a song, was now a fully realized composition of staggering beauty and complexity. The music that poured from the piano was a living thing, a breathing, pulsing entity that seemed to fill not just the concert hall, but the very souls of everyone listening. It was the sound of his soul laid bare. It was the story of a boy who lost his brother, of a man who locked himself away from the world, of a woman who walked through the rain and changed everything. It was the sound of the rain in the tea house, the silence in the elevator, the fire at the market, the kiss on the terrace. It was a confession, an apology, a plea, and a declaration of love so profound and so absolute that it transcended language. The piece built, movement after movement, each section more intense than the last. His fingers flew across the keys with a virtuosity that was almost superhuman, his entire body moving with the music, channeling something ancient and powerful. The audience was forgotten. The scandal was forgotten. The world was forgotten. There was only the music. There was only him, and there was only her. The piece swelled, growing in power and passion, the notes a torrent of emotion held back for 3 long years, finally released. The audience was mesmerized, many of them openly weeping at the raw, undeniable beauty of the sound. Even the chairman sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and something that might have been pride. Naomi sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She was witnessing the rebirth of a man. She was witnessing the resurrection of his soul. The final note faded, leaving a sacred, ringing silence in its wake. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the hall erupted. The applause was thunderous, a roar of appreciation and emotion. But Seo-jun didn't bow. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He stood up from the piano, his face a mask of fierce, unwavering resolve. He walked off the stage, not into the wings, but down the steps and directly into the stunned audience. He moved through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. People scrambled out of his way, their applause dying in their throats, replaced by shocked gasps. He walked all the way to the back of the hall to her. In front of everyone, in front of the cameras, in front of his thunderstruck father, he stopped in front of her. He reached out and took her face in his hands, his palms warm against her tear-stained cheeks. He looked into her eyes, his own blazing with a love that was both a surrender and a war cry.
I choose you. I will always choose you.
Seo-jun's public declaration was a detonation in the silent, ordered world of the Korean elite. The video of him walking off the stage, striding through the stunned audience, and claiming Naomi's face in his hands went viral, eclipsing the grainy paparazzi photo. The narrative shifted overnight. This was no longer a sordid scandal. This was a grand romance, a K-drama playing out in real life. The public, captivated by the raw emotion of his performance and the fierce devotion in his eyes, overwhelmingly took their side. He wasn't a reckless heir, he was a romantic hero. She wasn't a foreign interloper, she was the muse who had brought him back to life. Chairman Kang was furious, humiliated on a public stage. But just as he was preparing to disown his son and exile him from the company, another, more powerful player made her move. Grandmother Kang, the quiet matriarch, intervened. For decades, she had allowed her son to run the company while she held onto her controlling shares, a silent, sleeping power. Now, she awakened. In a private family meeting that was reportedly more terrifying than any corporate takeover, she made her position clear. She stood with her grandson. She believed in his choice. She saw Naomi not as a liability, but as the woman who had healed the broken parts of their family. The chairman, faced with the loss of his power and the unwavering resolve of his mother, was forced into a bitter, resentful retreat. The war was over. Love had won. A few days later, Seo-jun took Naomi to a quiet, beautiful cemetery on a hillside overlooking the city. The gravestone was simple, elegant, bearing the name Kang Min-seok. He had brought a small, portable speaker. He stood before his brother's grave, his hand holding Naomi's, and he played the recording of the piece from the concert. The beautiful, heartbreaking melody drifted through the crisp autumn air. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, he turned to the stone, his voice low and clear.
Min-seok, this is Naomi. She's the one I told you about. The one who hears the music. I think you would have liked her. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my way back. I'm okay now. We're okay.
His voice broke on the last word, a hairline fracture in the dam of his composure. Naomi squeezed his hand, her own tears falling silently. She knelt before the gravestone and placed a small bundle of wildflowers she had gathered that morning. She spoke softly, her voice steady and warm, as if she were speaking to a friend. Hi, Min-seok, I wish I could have met you. Your brother, he carries you with him every single day. In his music, in his silence, in the way he loves, you should know that. You should know that the music didn't die. It was just waiting. And it's beautiful, it's so beautiful, he's so beautiful. And I love him with everything I have, with every piece of my heart. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure he knows that he's worthy of love, that he's worthy of joy. That he's worthy of a life filled with music and laughter, and all the things you would have wanted for him. Seo-jun made a sound, a low, choked exhale that was almost a sob. He pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could feel the tremor running through his powerful frame. He buried his face in her hair, and she held him, her arms around his waist, her cheek against his chest, letting him grieve and heal in the same breath. They stood like that for a long time, two figures silhouetted against the autumn sky, the music from the speaker drifting over the quiet hillside like a benediction. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red, his face wet with tears, but his expression was transformed. The weight he had been carrying for 3 years had lifted. He was lighter. He was free. It was the most intimate, vulnerable moment of his life, a final, quiet letting go of the guilt he had carried for so long, and he shared it with her. He was bridging the gap between his past and his future, and he had placed her firmly in the center of it. Naomi's work, now secure and celebrated, began to receive international acclaim. An article in a prestigious medical journal about her success with the elderly patients led to a flurry of offers: a research position at Johns Hopkins, a teaching post at a London university, a chance to build a new program from the ground up in Sydney. The world was opening up to her. One evening, she sat with Seo-jun in her apartment, the offers spread out on her coffee table. "I don't know what to do. These are everything I've ever worked for." He looked at the letters, then he looked at her, his expression soft and serious. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't demand she choose him over her career.
Then you should take one, and I will come with you. I'll open a branch of the foundation in London. I'll find a piano in Baltimore. Seoul is not my home, Naomi. You are.
Her breath caught. He was willing to leave everything, his country, his family, his company, to be with her. He was not asking her to fit into his life. He was building a new life centered around her. A few days later, he invited her to the tea house where they had first met. It was empty, closed to the public. He had asked the owner for privacy, and the old man had smiled knowingly and disappeared into the back room. Seo-jun had prepared the tea himself, his large, powerful hands moving with a quiet, deliberate grace that was almost ceremonial. Each movement of the traditional ceremony was beautiful and precise, a meditation in motion. He had changed into simple clothes, a linen shirt and dark pants, and he looked younger somehow, less like the CEO and more like the man she loved. He told her what each step meant as he performed them: the warming of the pot to the exact temperature, the rinsing of the leaves to awaken them, the pouring of the water in a slow, controlled stream. It was a meditation, a prayer, a confession. His eyes never left hers as he worked, and she could see the intensity of his focus, the way he was channeling everything he felt into each precise movement. When the tea was ready, he filled a small, delicate cup and offered it to her with both hands, his head bowed slightly. A gesture of deep respect and humility.
In Korean, ijis yulo, niga gajin modan jios yul dulibnida.
She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the reverence, the offering. "What did you say?"
I said, with this, I give you everything I am.
She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. That night, when she returned to her apartment, a package was waiting for her. It was from her mother's attorney in Atlanta. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, in her mother's familiar, elegant script. The note from the attorney explained that her mother had left instructions for the letter to be delivered only when Naomi notified them that she had found the one. Naomi hadn't done that. She realized with a jolt that Grandmother Kang must have. The letter was short. "My dearest Naomi," it read. "I always told you that music could mend anything broken, but I was wrong. Love is the only thing that can do that. Music is just how love sounds. If you are reading this, it means you have found the one who hears your music. Don't be afraid. Let him in." Tucked inside the folded letter was her mother's ring, a simple, beautiful pearl she had worn every day. Naomi slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. It was a blessing from the past, a bridge to her future. And she knew, with a certainty that settled in the marrow of her bones, that she was already home. 6 months later, the Seoul sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Naomi stood on the rooftop terrace of the Kang Cultural Center, not as a temporary fellow, but as the permanent director of the newly established Clarke Kang Center for Music and Healing. It was a bridge, a fusion of her mother's legacy and the Kang family's resources, a testament to the healing power of both music and love. She had accepted the position at Johns Hopkins, but as a remote consultant. Her home was here. Seo-jun played the piano regularly now, not for grand audiences in sold-out concert halls, but in the quiet, sunlit rooms of the care facility for the elderly patients whose eyes would light up at the sound. He played for the children in the Foundation's arts programs, but mostly, he played for her. The music that had been locked inside him for so long now flowed freely, a constant, beautiful soundtrack to their life together. The silence was no longer his refuge, it was simply the space between the notes. Even the formidable Chairman Kang had begun to thaw. Humbled by the public's overwhelming support for his son's love story, and perhaps softened by his own mother's wisdom, he had started to build a fragile bridge of his own. Last week, he had invited Naomi and Seo-jun to the family home for a private dinner. He had awkwardly, stiffly, asked Naomi if she could teach his chefs how to make the shrimp and grits she'd once mentioned were her mother's favorite. It was an olive branch, a quiet admission of acceptance, and Naomi had accepted it with grace. Tonight, the grand concert hall was empty, dark save for the single spotlight illuminating the grand piano on the stage. It was their private concert. Seo-jun sat at the piano, his fingers dancing over the keys, the melody a beautiful, intricate conversation. Naomi stood in the curve of the piano, her eyes closed, and she sang. Her voice, rich and soulful, intertwined with his music, a seamless fusion of Korean classical piano and American soul. It was the sound of their two worlds, their two hearts becoming one. He finished the piece, the last chord humming in the vast, empty hall, a perfect, resonant sound. He stood up from the piano bench and walked towards her. He looked down at her, this impossibly tall, devastatingly handsome man, his love for her a tangible presence in his dark eyes.
I have a question for you.
I might have an answer. He smiled, a slow, breathtaking smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a ring. It was his grandmother's, an antique piece of intricate platinum, but it had been redesigned. In the center, where a traditional diamond had once been, there was now a single, magnificent star sapphire, a deep, velvety blue that seemed to catch the light like a captured piece of the twilight sky. He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't his style. He stood before her at his full, commanding height, a king offering his queen the entire world. He took her hand, the one wearing her mother's pearl ring, and looked into her eyes.
Naomi Clarke, you walked into my silence and you filled it with music. You walked into my life and you filled it with grace. You are my home. Will you let me be yours? Will you marry me?
Tears of pure joy welled in her eyes. She had her answer ready. It was the only answer there had ever been. Yes, always yes. His face broke into a radiant smile, the kind of smile she had never seen from him before, unguarded and incandescent, a smile that transformed his sharp, serious features into something almost boyish. He slid the sapphire ring onto her finger, next to her mother's pearl. A bridge between past and future. 2 rings, 2 legacies, 2 worlds, united on one hand. Then, with an ease that always surprised her, he wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as her joyous laughter echoed through the empty concert hall, bouncing off the high, vaulted ceiling and filling the space with the purest sound it had ever held. He stopped, holding her close, her feet still off the ground, and kissed her. It was a kiss that held everything: the rain in the tea house, the silence of the elevator, the fire of the market, the agony of the separation, the triumph of the concert. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and champagne and forever. When he finally set her down, he kept his forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged.
You are my music, Naomi. You are every note I was afraid to play.
Then play me forever. He laughed, a deep, rich sound of pure, unburdened joy, and kissed her again. Epilogue: their wedding was a perfect fusion, just like their music. It was held in the serene, beautiful gardens of the family's ancestral hanok on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind of day where the sky is so blue it hurts to look at it, and the maple leaves burn with every shade of red and gold the earth can produce. The guests were a beautiful collision of two worlds: Naomi's friends and family from Atlanta, their laughter warm and boisterous, mingling with the elegant, reserved members of Korean high society. The air smelled of chrysanthemums and the faint, sweet smoke of incense from the traditional ceremony. Naomi walked down the aisle, and the world went silent. She wore a custom-designed gown that was a masterpiece of cultural fusion, a creation by Minjai herself. The bodice was sculpted Western lace, delicate and intricate, while the skirt flowed into the voluminous, graceful lines of a traditional Korean chima, crafted from layers of ivory silk that caught the autumn light and seemed to glow from within. Her hair was adorned with a single, delicate binieo, a traditional Korean hairpin, a gift from Grandmother Kang. She carried a bouquet of white peonies and wildflowers. She was breathtaking. Seo-jun waited for her at the end of the aisle, standing beneath an arch woven with autumn branches and white roses. He was dressed in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, but he had forgone a tie, the collar of his white shirt open at the throat, a small, deliberate act of informality that made him look less like a CEO and more like the man she had fallen in love with. When he saw her, his composure, the legendary Kang control, simply dissolved. His eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them. He let them fall, openly, freely, in front of his father, his grandmother, the cameras, and the world. It was the most powerful thing he had ever done. They exchanged vows under the canopy of autumn leaves, weaving together the traditions of their two cultures. Seo-jun spoke his vows in Korean first, then in English, his deep voice steady and clear, each word a solemn, unbreakable promise. Naomi spoke hers with the same soulful conviction she brought to her music, her voice carrying across the silent garden. Grandmother Kang cried happy tears into a silk handkerchief. Even the chairman, seated stiffly in the front row, was seen to blink rapidly and look away. Minjai caught the bouquet with a triumphant shriek, and David Park, the kind colleague from the foundation who had become a dear friend, caught her around the waist with a grin that suggested this was a development he had been planning for some time. Later, as the reception swirled around them in a blur of music and laughter and toasts, Seo-jun led Naomi away from the crowd. They walked through the moonlit garden, past the ancient stone lanterns and the whispering bamboo, to a small wooden bridge arching over a lotus pond. The glittering Seoul skyline was visible in the distance, a man-made constellation framing their private world. They stood on the bridge, and the noise of the party faded to a gentle hum. He turned to her, his new wife, and took her face in his large, gentle hands. They weren't kissing. They were simply standing forehead to forehead, breathing each other in, his thumbs tracing slow circles on her cheeks, her smaller hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. Two people, from two different worlds, who had found their way to each other through grief and silence and music and an impossible, undeniable love. They were home. And in the quiet, sacred space between them, a new song was just beginning. Thank you for joining us for this chapter of your escape into unforgettable love. If their story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and leaving a comment below. We love hearing from you. And be sure to subscribe to Enchanted Chapters and turn on notifications, so you don't miss what's coming next. She was a queen without a crown, an omega in a world that worshipped strength. He was the Alpha King, a ruler whose power was absolute, a man who had never known mercy. When she is forced to enter a grand tournament to find his Luna, she discovers that true power has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with the soul brave enough to claim a king. Don't miss the next breathtaking story from Enchanted Chapters, the rejected Omega's royal claim, a queen of embers. Your escape continues.